I'll call the meeting to order. Thank you very much for your patience. Ms. Lohr.
Thank you, Your Worship. First item is a presentation from our Manager of Financial Services related to the 2011 annual report.
Ms. McLeod.
Thank you. Okay. This one. This one.
Councillor Scores is saying, throw some hard numbers at us. That's what he's saying.
Maybe I do need my calculator, right, Lou? Okay. Good evening, Mayor, Council, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be here to present to you the 2011 annual report. This presentation, along with the DCC report later on the agenda and the Statement of Financial Information, will wrap up our statutory reporting requirements for the 2011 year, and it will be behind us. I hope you've all had a chance to look at this document. It's really quite nice looking this year. We have a few people to thank for that. This is an absolute team effort between the Finance Department, our Corporate Communications Department, and our Corporate Planning Group. Everybody chips in to make this look the way it looks. And like last year, it's sort of divided into three different parts. There's a front-end document that has all the accomplishments and performance measures. There's the annual audited financial statements, and then there's a highlights brochure. Anyway, 2011 was really a very, very good year for the city. And looking at it from a work plan perspective and all the work that we did in the year, we organize our work plan in accordance with our 5 strategic goals. Those are strengthen neighborhoods, to expand local jobs and local prosperity, to increase active participation, to enhance sustainability of our services and our infrastructure, and of course to always try and achieve some excellence. So there is an awful lot of detail on performance measures and accomplishments in that first booklet that you got. It's all glossy and beautiful. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through this with a couple of highlights because we could be here all night. First, looking at our very first goal of strengthen neighborhoods. During 2011, over 500 residents came out and participated in various planning workshops to talk about things like housing choices in our neighborhoods and our communities and how they'll evolve in the future. So there's a lot of people out there who are interested, and we're interested in hearing, and so I think that's a really good thing. We also, our RCMP held their first junior Mountie camp, and we had 72 youth involved in that program. And we also hosted our first multicultural welcome event to 300 of our newest residents to bring them into the city, to talk to them about our services and what we do and what we can offer them. And so all of these kinds of things are the things that make people feel safe and connected in their neighborhoods. And that's a good thing for the city. Our key measure, although there's a number of measures, but our key measure for this particular goal is the quality of life. And our survey tells us that 99% of the residents in Coquitlam surveyed say that the quality of life in Coquitlam is good or very good. So that's actually setting the bar pretty high, 99%. We'll see how that goes for next year. Our second goal is to expand jobs and prosperity, and one of the things that Council has done in 2011 was to pass a bylaw that creates a property tax incentive for revitalization in the Millardville commercial neighborhood. The idea being that in the long term that will bring additional jobs into the community. Also, School District 43 has approved using QNet as their partner for fiber optic services, which is a really great thing because that's a big part of the QNet business plan. We also, during 2011, issued 66 filming permits that brought in $123,000 of revenue to the city, but more important than that, it brings in a lot of business because those people come in and they work in the city and they stop at the grocery store and they stop at the gas station and they do all sorts of things in our community that brings other business, which is a great thing. In addition to that, our Economic Development Department launched their Business Retention and Expansion Program. So our key measure for this particular goal is the construction value on our building permits, and I'm pretty happy to tell you that that's up a staggering 45% over 2010. And you'll start to see that in some of the numbers that I'm going to present a little later on and where the money comes from. Our next goal is to increase active participation. And do you know that in 2011, 70,000 residents registered for Coquitlam programs, and another 800,000 people dropped into our different facilities. So that's a lot of people. We also ran a community planting program that mixed city staff with community members to plant 6,800 trees and 32,000 native species shrubs, not those nasty invasive ones that we talk about all the time. Also in 2011, we had a number of new events. We had an Iranian festival. We had the Friday night market out in Spirit Square. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but that was so successful in 2011 that we're doing it again, and it started just 2 weeks ago. It's a kind of a great event. And we also had Light Up the Hall in December, which I think was also so successful that we'll probably be doing that again as well. Our key measure for this goal is the level of active participation for Coquitlam residents, and our survey tells us that on average our residents participate in an active activity 4 times a week, which is probably above the national average. Pretty good, pretty healthy community. So our next goal, our 4th one, is to enhance the sustainability of our services and our infrastructure. And in 2011, our environmental staff delivered 70 waste reduction and recycling programs to kids in schools. Over 2,000 children were brought into those lessons. And, you know, when you think about it, that's how you make real change. If you teach the kids before they get bad habits, that's a really good way to make something be different in the long term. We also, on the infrastructure side, we purchased the building that will become our new city center library, and we're busy as we speak getting that ready to be opened in the fall. My favorite, we opened the King Ed overpass to vehicles, which has, thank you very much, shortened my commute every day, and I really appreciate that. So it's taken out a lot of the I call them parking challenges, but they're not. They're driving congestion challenges, but it's much better, and I appreciate that. The other thing was we got honorable mention on the Climate Action Awards from UBCM for all the work that we've done, our carbon cutters, cutting our greenhouse gas emissions in Coquitlam facilities, so that's a good thing. Our key measure for this one is the overall satisfaction with city services, and our survey tells us that 96% of the residents surveyed say that they are satisfied or very satisfied with our services. So that's pretty good. Finally, we always want to achieve excellence, and so how do you achieve excellence? That's a little bit of a hard one to measure, but one of the ways you do that is that you utilize all the resources available to us. And one of the resources that's available to us in Coquitlam is a community with a lot of talent in it. And during 2011, Council approved a number of advisory committees that bring some of that talent and harness all of their knowledge and expertise in some of the things that we do. And there are over 100 participants in those processes. A good example is our multicultural strategic plan that came from our multicultural advisory committee. So those are kind of good things. In addition, we also get awards sometimes for best practices, and we got 3 government finance officer awards this past year. One for our financial reporting, one for our budget, and one for popular reporting, which is the little brochures that you see. Our measure for excellence in governance is taxpayer confidence, and I'm really happy to tell you that our survey says that 81% of the people surveyed tell us that they are either happy or very happy or confident in our services. So that is the work plan perspective and shows you all of the things we do. I'd encourage you to read that first booklet because it has an awful lot more detail, and it's really quite interesting reading. You know, we spend a lot of time in this room talking about the challenges we face and the things we should do. Sometimes it's nice to look back and see all the things that we did do that really are kind of wonderful for the community. From a financial point of view, 2011 was a really good year. We did surprisingly well, one of the best that I've seen in my time here. And the highlights include the assets are up, particularly our cash balances. Debts are decreased. We earned a small surplus in every single fund. All departments were within budget. Those are the kind of things that make finance managers sleep well at night, so it's all pretty good. On top of that, of course, we got an unqualified audit opinion from our auditors, which tells us that KPMG agrees that those audited financial statements in your package properly reflect the results of the 2011 year. So quickly looking at our balance sheet, the first item on our balance sheet is always a cash and investments, and the city ended the year with $235 million in cash. That's up $40 million over last year, which is a really good thing for the city. And that comes from 2 different sources. The first thing is, in 2011, I think probably with the development in Northeast Coquitlam, with SkyTrain coming to town, development activity was much higher than normal. And you can see that in developer contributions number up there and performance deposits. So that's where that extra cash comes in. The other area was in land sales. Generally, the city holds on to land until we have the right sort of formula for when we should sell it, when we get the very best value for the city. And in some cases now, with SkyTrain coming, that time is now, and so we sold some land during the year, and you can see that in our reserve for capital purposes. This extra cash is going to help the city to provide all of those infrastructure demands to meet the growth in the community. So that's a really good thing. Our assets are $1.65 billion at the end of the year. That is the historic value, not the replacement value, the historic value of all the buildings and the roads and the pipes and the vehicles that we use every day to provide services to the community. During 2011, the city built $37 million worth of new assets, road repaving and things like that. But on top of that, developers built over $30 million, which are turned over to the city on completion of the project. Now that sounds really great, but what that means is we have an extra $67 or $70 million worth of assets that we need to take care of. We need to maintain them and operate them, and we need to be prepared to replace them in the future when they reach the end of their useful life. And that is one of our biggest budget challenges, to take care of that really, really large infrastructure. On the liability side, the city's debt at the end of the year was $30 million. That's down $4 million from last year. And I know that for most people, $30 million sounds like a staggeringly large number, but when you compare it to $1.65 billion worth of assets, it's actually very tiny. It's about 1.8%. So if you were to equate that to the mortgage on a home, for the average home in Coquitlam that's worth $565,000, that would be a mortgage of about $10,000. I think we could all agree that we're in pretty nice financial shape. On top of that $30 million in debt, more than half of it, about actually 18 million of it, will be paid off within the next 4 years at no cost to the taxpayers. It will be paid by casino funds and TransLink collections. So I think that's good news. Not a lot of debt we have to pay for. To balance our balance sheet, of course, we have an accumulated surplus of $1.79 billion, and I'm sad to tell you that that is not a cash surplus, a whole bunch of money sitting around. That would be very nice and would, of course, make me very happy. Primarily, the vast majority of that money is the equity that we own in that $1.65 billion worth of assets. We own them all except for the $30 million, right? However, we do have some money set aside for very important things. Our reserves for operating purposes are for those recurring kinds of things like insurance, tax appeals, snow removal, and those kind of things that come along, but they happen at different levels in different years, and we don't know exactly how much. So we set aside a little bit of money in the easy years so that we have a little left over in the difficult years. We'll all remember 2008 when we spent several $1 million on snow clearing in the last month of the year. It was a bit of a challenge. This is what protects us from that kind of thing. Our reserve for capital purposes are things, the money that we set aside for our development cost charges, our land sale reserve, our vehicle replacement reserve, all of those kind of things. Seems like a lot of money, but when you compare it to $1.65 billion worth of assets, it's not as much as you might hope for. Our true surplus, the amount of cash that we have on hand, basically for emergency purposes, is $43 million. 2/3 of that belongs to our utility funds. You can imagine if there's ever an emergency and we need to replace our utilities, you have to dig a big hole in the ground to do that, so it's rather expensive. So this is the money that we have. If there is an emergency, that's what we rely on. So it's uncommitted at this point in time. During the year, we added to our surpluses or our reserves by a small amount for each fund. I know that sort of $4 million in the general fund seems like an awful lot of money, but that comes down to somewhere between 2% and 3%. So we were 97 or 98% spent. That's pretty close. We wouldn't want to be too much closer than that. Looking at our revenue and expenditure statement, during 2011, the city's revenues totaled $262 million. 70% of that revenue comes from our residents in the form of taxes or user fees for various services that they get. Normally, that's about 80%. This is a little bit bigger. It's a little bit smaller in proportion this year because we had so much more money from developer contributions related to that sort of large increase in development that happened, and also additional grant money, which is the tail end of all those infrastructure stimulus grants. So it's always a good thing when you can make that pie a little bit bigger, particularly when it's the revenue side. On the expenditure side, our expenditures were $192 million. Now, anybody who's pretty good at mental math will go, whoa, there's $70 million missing there that we didn't spend. That's what we spent on capital assets during the year. So it does, in fact, balance at the end of the day. Our largest area of expenditures, as always, is capital, followed by Parks and Rec, and then by our utilities, and then by our protective services. So what does all this mean? What it means is 2011 was a really, really good year. We made a lot of progress on all of our goals and objectives, and we are in a better financial position at the end of the year than we started at the beginning of the year. And that's kind of unusual, and that's kind of a nice thing. 2012 is looking to be fairly similar. Development collections are about the same as they were in 2011. We had sort of thought that might be a spike, but it looks like it's holding steady for another year. We know there's always going to be lots of challenges ahead of us, but we're in a pretty good place to address them. So that's all I have to say about 2011. I might draw it to an end. Any questions?
Well, I'm going to, Councillor Sikora has a question as well. I just want to begin by acknowledging all of Council. It was 2011 was we have a very good story to tell. This report reflects the disciplined stewardship of community assets and dollars, but all of Council has earned those accolades for the work that it did, and all of staff as well. Now, Councillors Hodge and O'Neill don't get much of the credit because they were both elected at the end of the year, I'll put it bluntly.
It won't be worse.
Both of them are proving to be amazing assets to additions to Council, giving much thoughtful and deliberate and at times insightful contributions. Former councillors Lynch and McDonnell also earn much of this credit because they were instrumental in 2011's decisions that brought the report that we have today. I thank all of staff on behalf of Council for the work that they've done, the discipline, the financial discipline primarily that they've brought to running a city as well as I think it possibly could, and I certainly give my hats off to the best manager of finance that there is in the world.
Oh, you're so nice. I didn't do that.
And Councillor Sikora, who's this year celebrates his 40th anniversary of having been elected. 40 years of public service to this city. He got elected at the age of 20. And Councillor Sikora.
Not quite 20, just a shade over 20. But however, you know, in a couple spots you have $43 million accumulated surplus.
Yep.
Okay. Now, the only thing I'd like to ask is that accumulated service, is it earmarked for anything? Is it just plain surplus?
That is the true surplus, but 2/3 of it belongs to the utilities. So about $15 million is the general fund for non-utility things, for emergencies.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted. Make it easy.
You're kidding. Yeah.
Wow, start the car.
Yeah, no kidding.
Again, thank you very much. We're going to do the official side of this. This is an annual report, and statutorily we will ask for if there are any comments or questions related to this report from the audience. We run a minor public hearing related to that. Any comments or questions? Second time. Any third final call for comments or questions from the audience? Seeing none, we'll declare that closed. Is there a motion to receive? Moved by Councillor Asmundson, seconded by Councillor Robinson to receive. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Did I do that right, Ms. Lohr?
You did it perfectly.
You reminded me before. So.
Item 2 are minutes of the regular council meeting held Monday, June 18th, 2012. The recommendation is that council approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3 are minutes of the Tri-Cities Homelessness Task Group meeting held June 1st, 2012. The recommendation is that council receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 are minutes of the Sport Council meeting held June 12th, 2012. The recommendation is that council receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, second by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4.3 is a recommendation arising from the committee minutes regarding a future covered multi-sports facility. The recommendation is that Council direct staff to undertake a needs assessment feasibility study for the development of a covered multi-sports facility in Coquitlam, including short and long-term solutions and financing options.
Second.
Okay. Motion's on the floor. Councillor Askinson.
I'm going to support this motion. It's been out there in the community for a little while. The one thing I do want to temper as we go out for a study to find out the needs of what's required in this potentially future complex, I just want to make sure that the expectations of the public there, we've done 2 studies already, one for the expansion of Evergreen, we're doing one on a tennis covered facility, and now this one, and we can't afford them all. So I want to make sure that while we're doing the study, it'll come back to Council for future deliberation and in a context of all our priorities and projects moving forward. But I'm glad to see that the proposal's here and going to be studied, but I think we have to make sure that expectations are kept in check as Council moves forward once we receive the study in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Yes, and certainly this is something that's been talked about in the sports community and the community at large. And I think the time has come to finally start looking at what it is that the community needs, and so how it can be delivered. I mean, the population in Coquitlam is growing. We know that we have some user groups that are having trouble getting space in our facilities. This is particularly in the area of our dry floor sports, which is lacrosse. We have one of the largest lacrosse organizations in Western Canada right here in Coquitlam, and it's also ball hockey is becoming a growing sport in the area as well, and those groups are finding trouble finding, they're having trouble finding floor time in Coquitlam. And as well as soccer in the winter seasons now are just having an awful time with field conditions and for the younger kids outdoors. So this is something that's been talked about for quite some time. I think it's time to look and see just exactly what the needs are, what could be built, how it would be financed, where it would be built. And the nice thing about it is this initiative has the support from both the Coquitlam Field Sports Association and the Sports Center Users Group. And I look forward to being able to move to the first phase of what is a several-step process before we get this. But the first step is to do a study, find out what it is that we need, who the users would be. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually added myself on the list. Actually, I completely support the concept, although I think that there is a step that we need to, I wish we could do before this, and that is to have staff report to us related to potential criteria related to the study, to be able to perhaps come back with a staff report to lay out what a study would look like, or what the range of options for the criteria as we move forward with this. And I don't know whether staff have any comments about whether that would be helpful at this point. Make sure that Council gets an opportunity to lay out what we might contemplate in such a facility prior to going for a viability study. If we go for a viability study and it comes back as viable in the following ways, and then Council weighs in and says that's not what we had in mind, then I think we may well not be heading in the right direction as quickly as we could. Mr. Stublin.
Certainly, I think that would be helpful. We can either do it prior to passing the motion or after passing the motion as a means of clarifying what the terms of reference before hiring the consultant is. We also would need to turn Council's mind to a funding source for the study, exactly how much it would cost and a funding source. So I would suggest if Council passes this motion, there would be a subsequent motion that staff report back on the terms of reference and financing source prior to commencing hiring of the appropriate consultant.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, following up on that, I'm wondering if we actually need to pass the recommendation that's in front of us, whether we shouldn't just pass the recommendation that the mayor is putting forward, because what we do if we pass the first motion is we commit ourselves to going ahead with this regardless of what staff says in the first place. Maybe staff is going to say, hey, a feasibility study is really going to be expensive, and it's going to be this, the consultants are this, and it's going to do that and that, and then we maybe wouldn't want to do this main motion here. So I would suggest that we only do what the mayor is suggesting.
It sounds to me, Councillor O'Neill, as you're moving on amendment that would read that council directs staff to report back on the conditions of establishing a feasibility study.
And that's it, not the main motion. Yeah.
So
exactly.
Staff are going to come back on what the decisions need to be made prior to establishing a feasibility study. Is that
That's
amendment?
what I agree. Yes.
Is that moved?
Yes, I'd move that.
Moved and seconded by Councillor Robinson on the amendment. Well, we'll go down the
Well,
speakers.
actually, I had one other question just generally on this. In the package we received, at the end of it, there's looks like it's a photocopy of a PowerPoint presentation. Referring back to page 6 of the report, it looks like this is perhaps a photocopy of a presentation made by Coquitlam Metro Ford and Sports Centre user groups. Joe Bassick presented on-screen presentation. Is that the case? Is that his presentation? Is that Councillor Hodge is saying yes?
We could activate Councillor Hodge's microphone for a second, please.
This was a presentation that was made to Sports Council, and it was based on this presentation that the Sports Council passed that resolution to be brought forward to Council. So this was based on a presentation to the Sports Council.
I was a little confused about it because several pages, a couple of pages of the presentation of the City of Coquitlam's logo at the top across a bar there, it sort of suggests that this is an official City of Coquitlam presentation and not one coming from a user group or private citizen or something. So if members of the public see this, they might be confused, and I think it should be clarified that this was nothing. This is not from the city. This is not something the city has advanced yet, and indeed, if we go along with the motion that's on the table now, the amended motion, that we're going to be well before this. So this was, I don't know, do you know how that happened? The City of Coquitlam's official logo goes onto this thing?
No, other than I think they were just giving it some graphic treatment to tailor it to the presentation to Council.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I didn't notice that.
I'd prefer to see the City of Coquitlam brand being associated with official City of Coquitlam business and not being used by other groups. So that's maybe a message you can pass along to your user groups there, and I think it's something that all of us should keep in mind, that our brand is an important thing, and it should be associated with things that are official city business. And so those are my points. Thank you very much.
Staff have taken note that perhaps we'll have to make sure future copies of this, if they're made again, don't have that logo or have a notation that this isn't an official document from the city. Thank you very much. Councillor Reid.
Well, great minds think alike. I was actually going to agree with Councillor O'Neill on his first point. On his second one, not so much. But on your first point, I think the amended resolution is fine. My biggest problem here is SkyTrain is inevitable. Obviously, it's on its way. And although it may seem that it's 2 or 3 years out, when you're looking at a facility of this magnitude, it takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of time, and it also takes a lot of study as to actually, it might be fine to design it, but where the heck are we going to put it? And my concern is that we do it sooner rather than later, and that we get on with this, Your Worship. And if we can't find funds before budget this fall, I want to make sure that they're in budget this fall, because we really need to get on with the planning of this large facility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor. You know, the one thing that bothers me is there'll always be something come up that somebody wants that's going to cost money. And I know that these facilities are badly needed and everything else. But I would hope that, A, we don't start mushrooming and putting things that are books behind to be built, and start building something ahead of time because the wishes of some council member or whatever it is. You know, those are the things that we must be very, very careful. To me, I have a sense that we're starting to have a Parks Recreation Commission here. And I remember the days when the Parks Recreation Commission was out selling things to the public, general public, that the mayor and council members didn't really even know much about. And came to a council meeting many times, and I got the shock that so-and-so has been promised by unelected body in a community that something should be built. And those are things that are very, very dangerous to the politicians, very dangerous. Not that it's not needed. I'm not arguing the point at all. But I'm arguing the point that the fact there's so many things that are on the books right now that we must build first. So that we don't queue jump things that are on the books and go to something else. In other words, if some facility is number 1 to come built, all of a sudden it becomes number 5 because this item has come forward or somebody's pushed it through. So those are things I'm really, really concerned about. I'm not against building facilities. I think it's the greatest thing because I'll tell you, when you build facilities for the kids of these communities, and I'm talking about kids, for children of this community, it keeps them busy, keeps their parents busy, keeps them out of trouble, because the nicest children will get themselves into trouble if they have nothing to do. So sports facilities, I'd much rather spend $200 million in sports facilities than $1 million for more police. So that's the way I am about sports. But these are concerns that I do really have, Mayor. I'm really concerned about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
I'd just like to find out from staff, assuming that we were to pass the motion as proposed amended by Councillor O'Neill, how quickly would we hear back from staff? I don't want to see a whole lot of detail.
We are sensing this is a priority, but we would want both strategic initiatives involved as well as the Parks group, and they would want to sort of look at a variety of things. I would think we could report back within a month or two. Would that fit to your schedule, Lori?
Ms. McKay.
We'll make it work.
So I would say, assuming a positive response from council, we could have a consultant out working while we were on the August break.
It might be a stretch to report back before July 25th, which is about 4 weeks away. I mean, I think it probably would likely be the first meeting in September.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important we get this one right, but Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. Well, I fully support this, and I will support Councillor O'Neill's amendment. I was just looking at the last line of this particular motion, including short and long-term solutions and financing options. We actually need to figure out how we're going to pay for this study. So I think it is important that we get this staff report so we can do this right, but I will fully support it. Thank you.
The amendment is to have staff report back. Any further discussion on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment? All opposed? The amendment carries. The motion as amended, which is almost exactly the same. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
The next 5 items are arising from this evening's public hearing. The first one is
the stuff you're waiting for.
Bylaw number 4303-2012. The recommendation is that Council give second and third readings to City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4303-2012.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 6, Bylaw number 4321-2012. The staff recommendation is that Council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4321-2012.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 7, Bylaw numbers 4314 and 4316-2012. related to 3501 David Avenue. The staff recommendation is 1, that council gives second, third, fourth, and final readings to City of Coquitlam Citywide Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 4314, 2012.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Robinson.
I'm going to support this, but I do have a question for staff. What struck me as I was looking at this during the public hearing and as well as the next item, we do a really good job of laying out the roads and how the roads will fit to all this, but we don't really demonstrate how pedestrians are going to get around. And this is supposed to be a walkable community. And I would really like to see in future diagrams, how are the pedestrians getting to the nearest nodes? So whether it's the school, whether it's the commercial center, because the idea is that people are supposed to be walking, and I look at the road and I'm thinking, no, maybe there's a shortcut. Or so we've been really focused on how we're going to move people, how we're going to move cars. But this is a walkable community, and I'd really like to see how people are going to be moving through rather than cars. Can we do that in the future? Is that possible?
Your Worship, we will pay attention to that. I guess my immediate response would be in the road layouts that show, and that's the full road allowance. You don't see the actual pavement surface there. But Coquitlam standard for residential neighborhoods is to have sidewalks. So there is, anywhere you see a road, there would be a sidewalk as part of that pedestrian network. And then as well, there are those walkways that go in between the streets.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is the walkways between the streets are not always very clear. And so what happens is we're seeing lots of cul-de-sacs. And part of the challenges of cul-de-sacs is they're not really made for pedestrians. And so if there's a way to demonstrate, because I have to sort of say, okay, well, how are people going to move? And should there be breaks in these blocks? Are they too big? If there's a way that, I don't know how to do it, you guys have graphic people, I'm sure, who do this.
Yeah.
But just something that sort of shows the pedestrian.
Maybe Your Worship, the attachment 3 that has the road network, we can maybe expand that out.
A red line or something that just shows where people will walk to get to where they need to go, something. That would be helpful. Because I see that between 72 and 71, it looks like there's some sort of lane, but I don't know if that's what that really is. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was looking at it. Now, if there were on the same question then, if there were a pedestrian route, it would be shown on the detailed subdivision plan.
Yes, Your Worship.
You're not giving me information we haven't asked for before. But
yes.
You're just clarifying the map.
Yes, in fact, Councillor Robinson is correct. If you look at attachment 2, there are some walkways shown between lot 71 and 72, and it does connect around, but you are correct. They aren't clearly demarcated in this map in a way that clearly jumps out at you as a pedestrian connection. We'll take that back and make sure we show those more clearly. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Second part of the recommendation is that council give second, third, fourth, and final readings to City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4316, 2012.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Sikora. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 8, bylaw numbers 4317 and 4318, 2012, relating to the property at 3500 block Princeton Avenue. The staff recommendation is 1, that council gives second, third, and fourth and final readings to Citywide Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 4317, 2012.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. You pulled yourself? You don't want to speak more. Okay. Okay. Any speakers at all? Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
2, that council gives second, third, and fourth and final readings to Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4318, 2012.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor, I'll go with Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 9, bylaw numbers 4310 and 4311, 2012, relating to the property at 1123 Westwood Street. The first recommendation is that Council give second, third readings to City of Coquitlam Citywide Official Community Plan Amendment Bylaw number 4310-2012.
Second. Moved by Councillor Rasmussen, second by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I will support this, but I have a bit of problem with the parking variances, and that's not a surprise to anybody sitting in this chamber. I have obviously, as a realtor and out there in the streets, I know the problems that we're having now, and what appears to be fine on plans just doesn't work in reality. So I am hoping that before this DVP comes back and before fourth reading, that staff can work with this developer, because I like this developer. I'm looking forward to working with you in our community, and I'm hoping that suggestions, you know, one of the things when we have our parking discussions with staff and engineering and that, they're saying, well, gee, you know, downtown, well, I'm saying downtown they build without parking spots for some of the suites, and maybe that's what we should be looking at here due to its proximity. And we have 40 suites. Maybe they could be sold at a reduced rate, which would sort of help us with affordable housing for some of our young folks, and at the same time reduce the parking problem. We also have a parking lot across the street that I would be glad to make it build into multiple stories, but that's probably too big a wish list, and I'm sure staff have other ideas of their own. I will support second and third reading, and I look forward to whatever staff can come up with. That is the only problem I have with this whole development. What I do like is they say it's an iconic building, and my language is much simpler. It's just I want the wow factor. I want something really wild. I want something that looks like you've arrived, and I know that your company is capable of building that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I, too, am going to support this, although I do have some questions about, from the TransLink letter. They talk about some concerns about the intersection and the two flanking roads. They speak to reducing the turning radii and adding curb extensions. I'm surprised that we haven't talked about the wheelchair ramps. They recommend 90-degree angles to the street. Right now what's proposed is one wheelchair ramp at 45 degrees, and our best practices as chair of the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee is that we're shifting to better accessibility on these curbs, better curb cuts. The bicycle route identification wayfinding treatments, that if they're putting in all this bicycle parking and really promoting it, then we really do need to promote it and make it as best and ideal as we can, as well as the buffer with the sidewalks and travel lanes. So I think it's important to take those into consideration. What's really, I think, a real challenge listening to some of these residents here, and I do want to address them because I think it's important to recognize their concerns, is that there's always that tension between livability and affordability and moving people around. And so the concern is always, well, we don't want more cars, we don't want more pollution. We want transit and transit options and SkyTrain. Well, the only way we can get SkyTrain and transit options is by having higher density. And that's the tension, and that's the challenge that we have. The other challenge we have in this community is that only 1 in 5 works and lives in this community. And we want to increase those numbers because it's better quality of life for everybody if you can live and work in the same community. Well, if they're bringing in some commercial offices, that means that there will be opportunities to bring work in. That means people can live and work in this community. So that's some of the tension that I've certainly been considering and listening to some of the concerns is how do we balance that out? And I think we do need to do more density. I think we do need to have the SkyTrain here. I do think having a Lincoln Station will make a difference, and we need to support that. I also do appreciate that Ani has taken some steps to mitigate whatever concerns that people have had by shifting the building as far west as they can to manage any sort of disturbance that having high-rise living may cause. The other thing that's really interesting as I look around the region, that these things, the change is hard, but once it's here, people do adapt quite well. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of change in city centre. And I do believe that it actually, in the end, will be best for all of us. There will be reduced traffic in the end. And I think this will be a project that adds to that. So I look forward to seeing it in full fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much, Mayor. You know, the one thing about it, all they're asking is for 13% of parking registration. That's it. I mean, it's no big deal, you know, but I'll tell you, that is the craziest piece of property that we probably had in the city and ever will have. It's such a crazy shape that, you know, and Ani's been a developer not only in our city but many other cities, and have done a tremendous job as far as developers are concerned, and the quality that they build. I mean, it's not junk, it's quality that they put into the buildings. And you know, I think they're the people that I would say that they're the only people that can make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Okay, if I can describe it that way, you know, maybe a silly way of describing it, but that's the way it is. So I have no qualms about supporting this. The fact is that, you know, yeah, we'd all like to have a lot more parking. We'd like to have parking that's going to be unused and a few other things. But you can't have two things. You cannot pay a top buck for a piece of property and get parking, then to build some parking lot across the street or something else on top, because then nobody will do that. If you're going to do that, put it in the plan, in a sales pitch when you're putting out the land up for sale, that this what is going to be required. Then the bids that come in for that land will come in accordingly. But this is not the case. This was not the case to begin with, and it isn't the case now. So I have no qualms about supporting this whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy on this particular site. I'm happy to see that the tower, the structure, has been moved over to the sort of to the west corner there. And you know, and I listened as the residents expressed their concerns and views on this particular property and the development that take place. And I agree with mostly, you know, with a lot of what Councillor Robinson said. That I think, you know, that there is change. It's taking place in the town centers, taking place all over the city of Coquitlam, and change is hard, particularly when it's happening right in your neighborhood. But after the change takes place, there are amenities that come with that change, and hopefully one of the amenities is going to be better transit, you know, in terms of SkyTrain. Hopefully we'll get an extra station close by. I think, you know, we're looking forward to seeing the changes start to unfold, and I think that down the road we will start to see the benefits of what some of this change is bringing right now. But I am really concerned about the traffic, and especially I'm concerned, and I've said this earlier today, and I've been harping about this, is about the parking. And I don't like variances on the parking. I think that we are going to have a shortage of parking in the town center area. We're already hearing about it with discussions at the property next door over at Windsor Gate. So we know that this area is going to be have challenges with parking. So I hope that that can be addressed before it comes back again. But I'll support it going forward for these readings. And but you know, I just want to say I think that it looks like it's a good development. It is, as Councillor Sikora said, a challenging site in terms of its shape and its location. And I think that the developer has done a good job in the presentation. And I think that when it's built, it will be an asset to this part of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I really like the looks of the project. I'm impressed with the way that the developers dealt with what we're all going to agree is a challenging site. I would say that it was an iconic building, except that word belongs to Councillor Asmundson. It's just a building that I like the look of. Some of the people who talked to us tonight talked about their challenges in keeping up with the changes in the project, that they were never quite sure what it was that was getting built there, and trying to keep on top of that. And I think one of the things I like about this project is there were a lot of changes, and the changes were predominantly in response to what the developers were hearing from the public. And that, I believe, is the way that it's supposed to be. There is a point that we all come to where it's time to make a decision, and I believe we need housing, we need density. That's what's going to move us forward as a city that people are going to want to live in, and I'm going to support this. I'm on side with several of my peers in having reservations about the parking variance. One of our councillors says, well, maybe downtown, down by Waterfront Station and places like that, they're selling suites that have no parking at all. And maybe if some of the suites had no parking, then we, and I'm kind of going, I'm not so sure, because I'm not sure. I think Ani's a pretty good builder. They're probably going to be finished before the SkyTrain gets here. They don't have to go back to Victoria for approvals. And so if we sell a bunch of suites that don't have parking stalls, we may have a bunch of cars looking for places to park on the street. Heaven forbid they'd park on Woodland Drive and walk around the corner to get into the building. I wouldn't want to see that happening. So I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to the parking, but my understanding is that the final word on the parking variance comes at development permit stage. That's not here yet. And so I think it's important. We're really not talking to my fellow councillors, I'm talking to you guys out there. I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to the parking. You're going to have to make us understand how the variance will work if you're still looking for a variance. And maybe some, but maybe not quite as much. We haven't heard anything yet about adaptable units, about units that are built so as to be ready for people to age in place, for people with mobility challenges, various physical challenges, to be able to live in them. Not necessarily built with all the facilities, but built to take them when the day comes. One of you has almost as much gray hair as I do and should be thinking about these things. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Councillor Asmundson.
Well, thank you very much, and I thank everybody for coming out tonight. I think what we're talking about is the evolution of change and change happening. Change is like when a townhouse complex was built amongst single-family neighborhoods. To those people living in that single family, created extra density, but at the time it blended in and everybody else works together. Personally, myself, I'm going through change right now. I had 3 houses beside me. I'm going to have 34. On the other side of the street, there was 3 houses. There's going to be 45 new houses in the area. I'm going to see almost 90 units beside me that wasn't there before. That's change. That's what's going to happen. Evolution of change is always going to happen. I think this project's in the right spot. I think the developer, I give him credit for adapting to the concerns and making changes that the community had raised concerns about. I think moving the tower furthest to the west to reduce the impacts of shadowing, I appreciate them working on that. I like the one thing that got in the report here, that they are going to make along their whole site an additional lane for traffic. So there'll be 2 lanes going northbound to help with it. For Coquitlam, then, it's up to them when they redevelop those properties along there to extend that full Westwood lane to 2 lanes all the way up. But this developer is going to put that 2 lanes in all along the frontage of their property on that site. I think it's a step in the right direction. I'll also say that for Mr. Nicholson, that there are adaptable units within the development. There 10% are going to be adaptable units, and I thank them because I know Councillor Robinson raised that issue, and they are putting that in there. The iconic design, it is one of my little comments I've mentioned to developers. Ani is one of them, that I want to see more unique-looking buildings, and they've taken a step in that direction to make this a better-looking building, and I appreciate them for that. The car share program that they're putting in there, once again, to help reduce the use of vehicles. With the future Lincoln Station coming in there, this is going to reduce car traffic. People are going to walk in that neighborhood. The shops down off Westwood are all close by. I think this is an ideal location for high density. It's within the 400 meters. I am not concerned with this development, the closeness to SkyTrain, the 13% reduction in parking, especially on this site with a constrained site, and noting that the developer has lowered the platform of the parking garage by going under one ground. There's a cost to doing that. I know there's some difficulties in that, and I appreciate them taking that step. But I think we add more parking on, you're going to wind up raising another floor, creating more impact on the neighbors. So I don't want to see that happen. And so I think the parking for this site and the variance that this site has works. So I will be supporting this proposal going forward. I think they've done a good job, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Asmundson. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. I'll be supporting it going forward as well. I think it's a very good building, and I think it's actually, people talk about it being in a difficult lot shape, but it's actually in terms of the shadow that it casts in a very good location, because the shadow that it casts will be to the north onto Parkland, onto a forested area, the southern end of Glen Park, and so it won't be interfering with the sunlight of residences across the street there or to the north. I guess during the summer there might be some shadows cast at sunrise and sunset that might affect some people, but for most part of the year the shadow will all be to the north, and that's always a big concern, and I certainly understand that. We live in a gloomy environment as it is, and what sun we get, we want to celebrate it, we want to enjoy it. We certainly don't want it blocked out by a high-rise there. One bit of clarification I would like, and I thought I'd read that Westwood Street was not going to be widened, but only at the intersection, and Councillor Asmundson talked, okay, I missed that. So Westward northbound is going to be widened to 2 lanes, is it?
It's on the full length of their property line from on the east side on Westwood to Lincoln will be made to a 2-road standard. And it's up to Coquitlam on their property.
Okay.
Okay, I got it.
I'm going to ask staff to clarify this, because we're giving information here that
right, okay.
Yes, Your Worship.
But if the information that you're giving isn't in the report when we're receiving
yes, the upgrades to Westwood would be it'd be a right turn lane, left turn lane, and a through lane. So there would be essentially at the intersection it'd be 3 lanes, 2 through lanes. Yeah, 2 through lanes. Yes, correct.
But the part
and the left turn lane.
But the part of Westwood that's further south, and that's Port Coquitlam's responsibility. So that could be squeezed there. So it's already very busy, I know, and then there's 2 lanes that go through the intersection, then squeeze down to 1, and I guess it'll be squeezed at 1 for a while, and then open up to 2 under the new plan. So that'll be a bit of a problem there, I think, but hopefully we'll get some cooperation with our fellow councillors there, city staff. So anyway, so the interestingly, there's sort of there could be seen as a relationship between the traffic and the parking. One would think that with less parking on location, there would actually be fewer cars on the streets, and therefore not as much of a traffic problem. So I think one of the councillors said he or she was concerned about traffic and about parking. Well, if you're concerned about the loss, not enough parking, that's actually a benefit to the traffic, because there'll be fewer cars on the streets. So I can see you being concerned about one, but not both at the same time. Maybe, I'm sure you can, but it's but they sort of offset a little there. So those are my only comments. Thank you.
Okay. 2 of us left to speak. Councillor Reamer.
Oh, why don't you let me go? Thank you. I also am going to support this project. I know change is really difficult. We were faced this when we were dealing with the Austin, at the corner of Blue Mountain and Austin, and with some of the residences across the street. I am happy with the fact that the building has been moved further west. I don't think the shadowing will be an issue. The sun comes up in the east and goes down in the west. I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue. The other thing is that for those residents behind the tower, you have your own street going in and out. I don't think the traffic from the building is going to affect you all that much. And my hope is that it's not going to affect the residents on the south side of Lincoln either, in that most residents will go west and then south out of the building. So I'm not as concerned. I'm looking forward to this, to seeing this building, and what I'm really looking forward to is seeing that it's not going to have the horrible impact, I don't think, that everybody is concerned about at this particular point. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll have a couple of comments myself. First of all, I wouldn't have called this property a sow's ear. I agree with Councillor Reamer's last comments about traffic. I don't know that the impact will be even notable to neighbors to the south. And similarly, of course, shadows. There won't be shadows to the south. I wanted to comment about the trees because the property is, if we rejected this, it would go back to commercial, and almost certainly the trees would come down and the property would be paved for the parking area associated with a store or whatever. And I suspect the impact would be, other than the height of the building to the west side of the property, the impact on the neighbors would be even more significant than what they're going to see with a residential building. Because the residential building by its very nature will be, well, it isn't a commercial operation. And lastly, the parking. I'm left with very little concern about parking on this site. I think the parking relaxation that has been requested is entirely appropriate given the proximity to a SkyTrain station. I think that the density is entirely appropriate given the proximity to a SkyTrain station, and I fully expect that Port Coquitlam will have to look at properties to the south of this and start to examine ways in which those properties will evolve. Those properties will change, as Councillor Asmundson pointed out, because they're very close to a SkyTrain station, and we need to, when we make those kinds of investments in rapid transit, society needs to densify both office and residentially around the stations as much as we can so that we can make as much use as possible out of, in this case, $1.5 billion on transportation. And it becomes more sustainable. It particularly becomes more sustainable partly because of the kinds of parking relaxations or even the units without parking that Councillor Reid was talking about, allowing family units, households to choose to not have a car, to choose to have bicycles and use transit. I think is the way of the future. There's going to be a percentage of our population, it won't be the majority, it will be a percentage though, that opt to not use a personal motor vehicle. And so I think that, again, the parking relaxations can be worked out, and I look forward to seeing what solutions staff come up with and speaking with the proponent after third reading prior to it coming back to us at fourth reading and DP. In the end, Councillor Secor is right. We've got a very good, responsible developer here. The proponent has done great work in Coquitlam and has done great work in other communities, and I think will do a very responsible and respectable and, in fact, wow kind of job. A wow kind of development in this site, and I urge them on. And I've listened carefully to the concerns of the neighborhood. I suspect that, and I'm quite pleased with the way in which the proponent has responded to those concerns since November. And adjusted the site and made it so that really we're going to end up with some very nice sight lines, almost a park-like setting on the east side of the building, east side of the project, and I think it's going to be a very good addition to the neighborhood. Any other speakers? Seeing none. The motion is second and third reading. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Second part of the recommendation is that Council give second and third readings to zoning amendment bylaw number 4311, 2012.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, seconded by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 10 is fourth and final reading.
On one item, I meant to raise this one point, and I'll only raise it related to, it's a question on N. Where are we at? Sorry.
Item 10?
My apologies. Go ahead.
Item 10, fourth and final reading of street vending and special event vending bylaw number 4308, 2012. Recommendations that Council give fourth and final reading to street vending and special event vending bylaw number 4308, 2012.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. And now I will raise my concern, now that you've moved it, on N, which is on Schedule B, page 3. There seems to be a prohibition on the noise of a generator, but there doesn't, and as the only form of noise nuisance. And I don't know whether that prohibition would have included amplified music. It doesn't seem to prohibit amplified music as a nuisance.
I don't believe that amplified music was specifically identified as a potential issue, but we would have our, I guess, our noise bylaw to fall back on if there was issues related to amplified music, and there's a provision about, I believe, general nuisance in our noise bylaw.
No, fair enough. I'm trying to contemplate a stationary, this is like an ice cream truck that's there all day. And he's there tomorrow, and he's there the day after. And I just, I love ice cream. I really don't like our ice cream truck.
You don't like the music from the Sting? Or?
The music from the Sting. Yep.
If that becomes a problem, we'll report back and fix it.
Okay, that was it.
We'll be reporting back on the semi-permanent locations, and we'll have the opportunity to address that.
Fair enough. No other comments. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 11, report on 5% Parkland provisions for a proposed subdivision at 1360 Glenbrook Street. The recommendation is that Council require the owner of the proposed subdivision to provide 5% cash in lieu of the market value of the subject lands to address the Parkland provisions of Schedule 941 of the Local Government Act.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. And this one, too, I have a challenge with. This one, almost two-thirds of the site, more than two-thirds of the site now, or three-quarters of the site is going to be public space, effectively. It's going to be retained for a public purpose. Is it not?
No, Your Worship. It's simply being held as a covenant area by the owner. It's not a public accessible space. It's simply a riparian protection area.
No, I understand that. But it's being held for a public purpose, the riparian zone. And I'm wondering, we had this battle earlier on. This was a couple of years ago, just south of there, where the question becomes. We're making him give up effectively three-quarters of his property, and then we're saying we also want 5% in lieu, in cash in lieu, and yet we're not. And I recognize that there is a resistance among some people in the city to take on these lands as parklands in some cases, and I don't. And it's still a challenge I've got. I would almost prefer, this is a tremendous ravine, and I've walked it, and granted it's private property, but I'm trying to understand the perspective and why we would opt for $29,000 in cash in lieu of trying to figure out whether Mr. McIntyre or anybody.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And excuse me, I just wanted to confirm something with Raul about that. No, I take the point. Actually, it's through senior government regulations that we're following here to protect I think it's Hyde Creek, the watercourse and repairing a corridor through there. And the approach we take, particularly with the smaller property owners and the non-experienced developers, is if they want to retain that area, that's fine. The city's not looking to take that from them, but it does need to be protected by covenant. I guess the only upside is that the value of that land so encumbered, because you can't build on it, and plus it's restricted by covenant, it doesn't have a high value. So when we arrive at the 5% of land value, you're not valuing developable land for that portion. But it is a little bit of a double hit in the sense that this is land that needs to be set aside, even though it will remain in private ownership. It's there for fisheries purposes.
No, and I understand that. I wonder if I know that in Coquitlam, for example, they do try to absorb in the riparian zones as parkland, and we have made the conscious decision years ago not to do that, and I don't know whether it's time to revisit that. And that was my question. Councillor Reamer.
I think you've answered my question, and basically this is a local government act requirement, correct? So we really don't have the authority to change this recommendation, do we?
We can vote no, I think.
Your Worship, the property that is being set aside is being set aside under the Fisheries Act, so it has to be protected under RAR regulations. The city has the ability to apply 5%, and in doing so, we do so typically outside of the areas protected by RAR, because those typically are highly devalued to the point where there really no particular city value in terms of acquisition for any kind of public or even publicly accessible space. So the city takes the position, as we do in larger developments as well, a few of them which we've seen today under the public hearing, where those lands are pursued by the city through our authority, but we don't value them unless they are part of an active or publicly accessible piece of property. We would typically have that dedicated to the city, or actually held by the applicant under the fisheries protection under RAR, and we would take the 5% cash in lieu.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, I'm going to thank Mayor Stewart for raising this issue. I do think it's a bit of a double whammy. We've changed our process, how we've come and gone on this one. We used to acquire the land at a nominal value, mind you. We did give credit for the land, and we did take land along watercourses, riparian areas as parkland, and we've changed our tact on that. And I do think, as Councillor or Mayor Stewart has pointed out, that it's a bit of a double whammy that we RER it, take it as fisheries, and then we just covenant it, then we turn around, we take the 5%, and plus on top of that, this person pays all the DCC charges also. So I do agree with Mayor Stewart that this is a bit of a double hit for some of these processes, and we have changed our direction on this within the last number of years. That we used to go and acquire at a nominal rate to offset the 5%. We would give them some value credit for the land and take it within, because then we would have, especially on these ravines here, we would have better control over the back part of it rather than being covenanted. That was the thought years when we first did this, when I first came on council, was that if we had, as the land rather than covenanted turned over to the city, we would gain better control over that sensitive area as city property. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. I'm finding that. Is it on now?
You're active now.
Okay, good. Yes. I'm finding this very interesting. I didn't quite realize.
No, so you're not active yet.
Pardon me?
Just 1 second.
You're still flashing.
You are now.
Now I'm on. Okay, thank you. I didn't quite realize the import of this or the interesting questions until listening to the discussion, so I thank you. And as I was listening to the mayor speak, I was thinking this is a bit of a double whammy. I've been reading a fellow named Mark Milkey, who is writing about property rights, and he would describe this sort of scenario as regulatory taking, where it's not expropriation with compensation, but it's expropriation of usage without compensation, essentially. And on top of that, actually, we're demanding there's a 5% donation to the city. So it's worse than regulatory taking in a way. I don't know enough about actually the overall policies, but I'm just really responding to what I've heard tonight here. To me, it is a troubling thing. And you could say that, well, he still owns the property, but he can't use it. And indeed, we hear that there are some hikers who now and again walk up and down the stream banks on private property. The mayor said he did that, was invited to, and I imagine other people will do that as well. So it becomes de facto public property. Does he have the right to build a fence around this?
Yes. Yes, he does.
Even right down to the water line? Right down to the water line? Is he allowed to build something like that, even though it's a fisheries area?
The SPIA that's been identified by the applicant's QEP, Qualified Environmental Professional, would typically recommend or call for fencing along the top of the SPIA to keep people out of there. I think that they would have concern about fencing going right down into the watercourse itself. So a portion of the property boundary could be fenced, but I don't think they'd see fencing right into the watercourse.
Okay, interesting. I really have to admit I don't know enough about the overall subject and how it works. I know it's been a big subject in past years on council. And it's a bit of a can of worms, I guess, but I'm just giving sort of my off the top of my head reaction to what I'm hearing tonight, and it's unsettling in a way. So that's it. Thank you.
And just if I could make a couple of comments.
Mr. Stedman.
I mean, there's a long history to this, and Coquitlam has landed on a policy of not taking those ravines for parkland, and I think that was a wise decision, and I would not recommend we change any fundamental policies in that regard. Having said that, and you could argue that this particular property was encumbered by a natural stream which could never be built on because of the rules that others have imposed, and it has nothing to do with what we are doing. Having said that, it can be recognized that this property is severely affected by a combination of factors, and so if council wanted to give some relaxation because of the cumulative nature of those aspects, that might be something we could do on an exception basis. I wouldn't want that to become policy, though, because then there's a number of other issues that rise out of that. I'm not sure that's helpful, but that's anything that we would do, I would want to make sure we did it on a clear exception basis linked to the magnitude of the effect on this particular property.
Enough about it to propose
anything. Okay. Councillor Robinson's next.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to comment that you can't kick a soccer ball around in a ravine, and you can't have a playground, although I have to say in some ways they're the best playgrounds, but it's less than ideal in terms of the value that the stream has to the environment. So I'm not prepared to change our policy at all. I think that would be a disastrous mistake at this point.
You, Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of properties like this up in the Westwood Plateau when we develop there, and there are properties in other areas, and I'm dealing with one right now. It does have a value to it. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So some people look, and even though they know half of the backyard is a covenant, the fence is placed appropriate wherever it might be, at top of bank or wherever the covenant ends. And their kids can play, and they can kick the soccer ball, and the dogs can run, and all of those things. And some people just like it because it's absolutely private. So it has a small value, but it still is their private property. So we've gone through this discussion many times, and I just think that sometimes it appears unfair, but if you had two absolutely identical houses sitting on these lots, one on the big lot and one next door, and the big lot, although you can't build anything on it, you can have lots of trees and plants and vegetable garden or something, but you can't put any structure on it, that's still a little more appealing than the one right next door. So, thank you.
Okay, and I'm glad that comment was made, because what covenants do we place on the ravine property, the part of the property that isn't that usable? Could you put a vegetable garden?
No, on the top.
So the two properties that you could put vegetable gardens on are identical in size, right? I understand. In fact, I would kind of think it'd be kind of intriguing to have the large lot.
To have the large lot, yeah. That's all. That's the
But I'm struggling with two questions. One is the double whammy. But secondly, whether there is a value, because I've been in that ravine and I don't know that we're making the right decision. I argued against it 2 years, I guess, well, it was probably 4 years ago, when an earlier property down there is a loop trail that gets us down to the water level and then back up right off of David down at the foot of Glenbrook. And to me, that there is a value to that. There is a public amenity value to that space, and notwithstanding that you couldn't do anything in it other than perhaps a small trail or something. And so I'm left with both questions still: the cash in lieu double whammy, and although I'm not as troubled by that as I am by whether or not we are making the right public policy decision to stay away from ownership of the major ravines. I'm not talking Smiling Creek. I'm talking about major ravines. There are some, for example, right now is it doing it in public or? Yes, I think we are. The Harbor Chines area, where we're examining slope stability. There are slope stability questions and there's liability questions, and so someone who owns this property may well decide that can I in fact put a fence down to protect myself from the liability of the teenagers that are down there drinking during or whatever. So I'm struggling with this, and I'd be fine with a motion to defer so we could have another discussion about this if we want, but I'm not. Okay, moved by Councillor Asmundson and seconded by Councillor Raymer to defer. Councillor Nicholson, obviously on the motion on defer. Yes.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, what I was going to say wasn't going to necessarily be on the motion to defer, but I think it's perfectly appropriate to it just as well. I won't support the motion to defer. This is a fascinating discussion, but I'm not hearing anyone propose an amendment to the motion. If you don't like it, if you don't think it's appropriate, then perhaps you should amend the motion. Or perhaps we should say that we need a report from staff on the entire issue of whether we consider what I would not call a double whammy, whether the fact that some other level of government has imposed some requirements around some aspect of some person's property, and now they've come to subdivide it, and whether or not we should treat them like everybody else who comes to subdivide a piece of property and ask them to contribute towards the parkland that will be one of the amenities that we have to provide in the neighborhood when they do the subdivision. But to defer this specific decision because of a broad, is this the right policy to be applying when we've been applying it for a number of years, I don't think is appropriate. So I won't support deferral. I would prefer to deal with the motion as it stands or as it might be amended. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing any other speakers on deferral, Councillor Raymer.
Well, I will support deferral because I do need some further information. As Councillor O'Neill indicated, he does. I'm kind of in the same position as that. So if a deferral means that I can get some further information, I think that would be a better place for me so that when I do come back to look at this motion, I'm making more of an educated decision. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Councillor Asmundson for clarification. Normally we defer to something, to another meeting or to something.
Yeah. A couple of things on that. The second point is that the 5% in cash in lieu only develops on somebody over 3 lots, going from 3 lots. So it doesn't take in all development in the city. It only takes on a select group of people only. And by that nature, I think is unfair in the nature that you're only taking 5% off of a larger landholder. Somebody subdividing more than 3 lots pays 5%. So it's limited in its scope. to who has to pay the 5%. But I think I will have the deferral related to a staff report to come back on this issue. I think there has to be some other clarity around this issue because it doesn't apply to all development. Only a small percentage of landowners wind up getting hit with this double charge on this. And so I think it needs to be looked at in a more broader sense.
I'll ask the seconder if that's consistent with what she seconded.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So the motion is to defer requesting a staff report to come back to council on the question of, well, I guess both questions, the taking of potential parkland in ravines and the double whammy, as someone called it. Further discussion? Seeing none, the question is deferral. All in favor of deferral? All opposed? Councillors Reid, Nicholson are opposed, and Robinson are opposed. The motion to defer carries. Go ahead.
Item 12, fourth and final reading of zoning amendment bylaw number 4296, 2012, related to a proposed subdivision at 3465 Princeton Avenue and 1397 Kingston Street. Recommendation is that council give fourth and final reading to zoning amendment bylaw number 4296, 2012.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Zakora, second by Councillor Asmundson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 13, parking rates and bylaw amendments. Recommendation is that council give first, second, and third readings to parking management amendment bylaw number 4324, 2012, and approve implementation of the parking rates outlined in this report for all on-street pay parking locations.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Segura, second by Councillor Reamer. Oh. Reamer, sorry. The other Councillor Reamer. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 14, the 2011 Annual Drinking Water Quality Report. The recommendation is that council receive the 2011 Annual Drinking Water Quality Report and direct staff to forward a copy of the report to the Fraser Health Resources.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, second by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? I raise a glass to that. Carried unanimously.
Item 15 is the 2011 Annual Development Cost Charges Report. The recommendation is that council receive the report for information.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Asmundson.
Through to Mrs. McLeod. When will we be seeing the revised development cost charges application coming back before council?
We're actually hoping to bring that forward, I think, on July 18th
Okay.
at the workshop.
Thank you very much.
Anything else? Motion is to receive. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 16 is the 2011 Statement of Financial Information. The recommendation is that council receive the Statement of Financial Information for the year ending December 31st, 2011.
Moved by Councillor Reid, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 17 is the Permissive Tax Exemption Policy. The recommendation is that council approve the City of Coquitlam Permissive Tax Exemption Policy and that the elimination of any permissive tax exemptions be phased in over 3 years to allow organizations impacted by the new policy time to adapt to this financial change.
Moved by Councillor Sikora, seconded by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? I'm opposed. Motion carries almost unanimously.
That concludes the items on the agenda.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Just on the last deferral motion that was made, could we have a number of properties that we've dealt with in the last little while that were caught under this situation? The 5% in lieu of, because we changed our rules and everything. Perhaps I'll phone tomorrow and explain what I mean, because that's a briefing.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Seeing none. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Robinson, Councillor O'Neill, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. We'll have a question period on tonight's agenda items. Any questions on tonight's agenda items? Any questions at all on tonight's agenda? Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much all for coming.